Hello and welcome to Classic Motorsport Podcasts. I'm Gareth Thomas and today is episode 3 of Classic Motorsport Podcasts, the story of Embassy Hill, a team that raced in F1 from 1973 to 1975. It was formed in late 1972 when the team's founder, Graham Hill, then driving for the Brabham team, was unhappy with the atmosphere there. He announced in late 72 that he was starting his own team for 1973 as owner and driver, setting up shop in a warehouse based on an industrial estate in Hamworth in West London. Hill got a small team of 20 engineers and mechanics, getting sponsorship from Embassy Cigarettes, which were his sponsors for the team, and operated a team with cars purchased from Shadow. The team and Shadow were basically selling their DN1 chassis for Embassy Hill to use for Graham to drive. However, that wasn't the complex part. The DN1, which Hill had purchased, was basically bought in parts and built at their workshop. But the DN1s were still being built when the 1973 season started in Argentina and then continued on into Brazil. The Work Shadow team raced in South Africa. With the delayance, Hill decided to rent a Brabham BT37 at the non-championship race of Champions, and that ended when he ended up having an accident at the start of the race. They didn't enter the international trophy at Silverstone, but the DN1 was ready in time for the team's first ever race, the Spanish Grand Prix at the Mont circuit. Mont was a street circuit, and with a brand new team, Hill knew it was going to take time. But he was 8.5 seconds slower than the pole time of Ronnie Peterson, and almost 6 seconds slower than Jackie Orver's time in the Work Shadow. This was in 1973. If this was happening now, you'd be not allowed to race because you'd be too slow with 107%. In the race, Hill managed to track 7 laps before his brakes failed. But at the following round in Belgium, Hill once again was just under 8 seconds slower than Ronnie Peterson's pole time, and 6 seconds slower than George Foreman's time in the Works Shadow. And Graham Hill finished 9th out of 9 cars. During this period in 73, the team were only entering 1 car for Graham Hill to drive. More on that later. At the Monaco Grand Prix, a race that Hill won 5 times, in the 60s, in his days when he drove for BLM and Lotus, Hill hoped he would do well. Qualified 25th out of 26 cars, luckily 4 seconds off the pace, and ahead of Andrea Diadamich's Brabham, the car that Graham drove the previous year. But he retired with suspension failure after 62 laps. And then over to Sweden for their first Grand Prix in Sweden, because it was the first time held there. And Hill qualified 18th, 3 seconds off the pace of poleman Peterson, and only a few milliseconds behind Jackie Orver's Work Shadow, but ahead of George Foreman's Works one. And in the race, Hill retired with ignition failure after 16 laps. And then at the French Grand Prix at Paul Ricard, Hill qualified 16th out of 25 cars, over 3 seconds slower than poleman Jackie Stewart, and Hill managed a 10th place finish. And then at the British Grand Prix, saw the biggest car crash of the season. Hill qualified 27th out of 29 cars, and what happened was that it became 28 cars when David Purley did not start after he spun off on the warm-up lap, but Hill was involved in the multi-car crash that was caused by Jody Scheckter trying to get past Denny Hulme, taking out multiple cars. Hill's car was struck in the rear and the wishbone broken, but Hill managed to drive it back to the pits under its own power. But then, when Hill restarted, he drove okay, and then the steering column failed and had no steering. And then at Zandvoort, for the Dutch Grand Prix, Hill qualified 17th out of 24 and was not classified as he completed 56 laps of the 72 in a race marred by the death of Roger Williamson, who was bumped to death. Safety procedures were upgraded in time for the German Grand Prix, but then Hill qualified 21st out of 23 cars, and Hill finished 13th on the lead lap in a race won by Jackie Stewart for the 27th and final time in his career. And then in Austria, at the Österreich Ring, Hill qualified 22nd out of 24 cars and ended up retiring with suspension failure. And then at Monza for the Italian Grand Prix, Hill got 22nd place and on the grid, but finished 14th. And then to Canada at Motorsport Park, and in the wet weather, obviously Hill qualified 17th, but then finished 16th, 7 laps down on race winner Peter Webson in a rather confusing and error-prone race, because the race organisers got their lap strap confused so badly that it took several hours to decide who was the winner. And then to the United States. Obviously, the race weekend was overshadowed by the death of Francois Fair during qualifying, and Hill qualified 19th out of 28 cars, but it was later reduced to 25 as a result of Surveyor's accident and the withdrawal of Jackie Stewart and Chris Amon in the Till team. Hill finished 13th, 2 laps down on race winner Ronnie Peterson. And after the 1973 season, Hill scored no points, and the team switched to Lola cars from 1974 after Hill commissioned them. Cars tested well before the end of 1973, the Lola T370, for the January start to 1974. First race of the season was in Argentina. The team entered 2 cars for the season. Guy Edwards was partnering Hill in the team. Hill qualified 17th, Edwards was on the back row of the grid. Hill was running 10th when his engine failed, with a few laps remaining, while Edwards finished 11th, 2 laps down on race winner Denny Hulme. In Brazil, Hill qualified 21st and Edwards 25th and last, over 2 seconds slower than Richard Robarts who was the next slowest car. The race was shortened, and this was at the time still a feat at the time in 1974, with the race being shortened. Hill finished 11th, and Edwards retired on lap 3 with chassis problems. It was 32 of the 40 laps that was completed, so 3/4 distance was eligible for 4 points for the top 6. However, neither Hill nor Edwards won the points. One car was entered for Hill at the 1974 Spanish Grand Prix, qualified 18th but finished 12th, but the weekend was marred by the death of Peter Revson in pre-race testing the week before. But the European season began in Spain. Edwards returned but failed to qualify. Hill started 19th, but the engine in the T370, which was a Cosworth DFE, which the team had been using since the team started in 73, blew at half distance. In Belgium, it was the first time that Edwards outqualified Hill, 21st and 29th respectively. Both cars finished the first race for the first time. Hill finished 8th, 2 laps down on race winner Emerson Fittipaldi, and Edwards finished 12th, 3 laps down. At Monaco, Hill qualified 19th and Edwards 24th. Hill finished 7th and Edwards 8th. Once again, 2 and 3 laps down respectively on race winner Peterson. The team went batter in Sweden after starting 15th and 18th, with a point for Hill, which he finished 6th, and Edwards 7th. Hill's 6th place was his last points as a driver. But could the team achieve more? Both cars were only 1 and 2 lap adrift of race winner Jody Scheckter in Sweden. Edwards again outqualified Hill at the Dutch Grand Prix, where they started 14th and 19th. But retirements for both cars, Hill with gearbox failure and Edwards with fuel system failure. In France, once again, poor qualifying for Hill and Edwards. 20 and 21st of the 22 starters, Hill finished 13th and Edwards 15th. Everything went well at the British Grand Prix, but then during Formula 5000 practice, Guy Edwards was participating in a practice where he crashed and broke his wrist. Peter Geffen got called in to come in as a substitute and outqualified Hill 21st and 22nd, but retired on the first lap because of physical problems, while Hill finished 13th. Edwards returned to the German Grand Prix but struggled with the wrist while it was healing around the 14-mile Nordschleife and failed to qualify. Hill started 20th and finished 9th. Because it was not healed properly with his wrist, Edwards was replaced for the rest of the season by Rolf Stommelin. He outqualified Hill in their first race together, the 1974 Austrian Grand Prix. Stommelin qualified 13th, Hill in 21st, but the German suffered a puncture and had an accident. Hill finished 12th. In Italy, it was Stommelin 14th, Hill again in 21st, but Stommelin's suspension failed at half distance while Hill went on to finish 8th, 1 lap down on race winner Peterson. Heading to North America for the last 2 rounds of the season, it was Stommelin qualified to finish 11th, with Hill starting 20th and finishing 14th. For the final round in America, the US Grand Prix, Stommelin again out-qualified Hill, 21st and 24th, but Hill brought his T370 home in 8th, while Stommelin struggled with the car finishing 12th and last 5 laps adrift of race winner Carlos Reutemann. But the race weekend was overshadowed by the death of Helmut Korny. In the World Drivers' Championship, Hill was classified 8th with 1 point. And Lola finished 12th in the Constructors' Championship, also with 1 point. In 1975, the Embassy Hill team ran the T370 until the T371 was ready. Hill and Stomlin stayed on the team for 75. In Argentina, Stomlin and Hill qualified 19th and 21st. Stomlin finished 13th, Hill was 10th. At Brazil, Hill out-qualified Stomlin for the only time during the lifespan of the T370, qualifying 20th to Stomlin's 23rd. Hill finished 12th, Stomlin 14th. In South Africa, Stomlin drove the new T371 while Hill continued to use the T370. However, Hill had an accident in practice and could not qualify. While Stomlin in the T371 ended up finishing 7th. At the Spanish Grand Prix, Graham Hill chose not to drive the car. Francois Migo was put alongside Stomlin. And once more, Lola designer Andy Smallman decided to leave Lola to work with Embassy Hill, so the T371 was renamed the Hill GH1. In Spain at the Mont Hewick Park circuit, lots of protests and mayhem about trying whether the race would go or not because of problems with the barriers, which I mentioned in my previous episode. Because of accidents and problems, Stomlin led the race, but the rear wing on this car broke, sending him into the barrier. Stomlin was injured. 5 spectators were killed. The Embassy Hill mechanics were working on it prior to the race. Migo finished 10th for those still running when the race was stopped after 29 laps, but was 11 laps down and not classified. Because of the problems in Spain, 18 cars would be allowed to race in Monaco. Graham Hill drove the car, but this affected his chance to qualify. He failed to qualify by 0.37 seconds, having used both the GH1 and the T370. Tony Prix replaced Hill, and Migo returned to replace Stomlin for the Belgian Grand Prix. Prix, on his debut, got a 4th row spot, but spun at chicane retired on lap 18 with piston failure. Migo retired with suspension failure on lap 58. For the Swedish Grand Prix, and this is for 1975, Van Struppen drove the second Hill car. Prix was retained. Prix was shown little respect for elders, and this was a young guy in 1975 showing what he could do in a terrible car, overtaking a Penske of Mark Donoghue and the Lotus of Warner Peterson, and given a challenge to championship leader Emerson Fittipaldi. Then Price's gearbox was jammed in 4th and repassed by Donoghue, but gained first points to Embassy Hill, but it would prove to be the only time of Price's F1 career. Stomlin retired with transmission failure on lap 48. For the Dutch Grand Prix, Struppen was replaced by Alan Jones. Price finished 7th, Jones was 13th. At the French Grand Prix, Price finished 7th and Jones 16th. The team were looking forward to the home Grand Prix. Then, the shock announcement. Graham Hill announced his retirement as a driver after 17 seasons and 176 races to concentrate on running the Embassy Hill team. Jones finished 10th, Price finished 15th, but the race was rain shortened despite him, Wilson Fittipaldi in his Copasuca, Dave Morgan in the Surtees, John Nicholson in the Lingard, Brian Henton's Lotus, Carl Pace's Brabham, Jody Scheckter's Tyrrell, and James Hunt's Hesketh going off at Club Corner. That's a lot of cars going off at one turn. The German Grand Prix saw the Hill team's best result with Jones 5th, but Prix retired through an accident. Wolf Stommelin returned for the Austrian Grand Prix, where he finished 16th. Prix was 15th, but the rain intervened and the race was rain shortened after 25 laps or so. And the race won by Vittorio Brambilla. And then they went to Italy, a third row spot for Prix, but he and Stommelin retired with accidents early as a result of the first chicane. The chicane was later modified and moved upwards in 1976. The United States Grand Prix was the final race for Prix and the MC Hill team, who only entered Prix, who retired after going on the outside of Peterson, but Peterson had spun and Prix tried to avoid him, thus broken his suspension. During the summer and autumn of 1975, the Hill team were developing the Hill GH2, which was resemblance of the Brabham BT44 and the McLaren M23. Prix had begun the testing in the late summer of 75 at Silverstone. Times indicated they would hope for a successful season in 1976. During the final test at Paul Ricard in November of 75, being much faster than the GH1 and setup changes made the car easy to drive. On November 29th, 1975, the team were packing up and getting ready to leave from Paul Ricard from the Castellet Airport to Estria Airfield. The day before, Graham Hill flew his Aztec to the circuit. They were scheduled to return, but the test was curtailed. Photographer Anthony Armstrong Jones, known as Lord Snowdon, had considered flying with the group, but did not go as he had already taken enough photographs. On board with the team were Graham Hill, Tony Prix, Reed Brimble, who was NBC Hill team manager, mechanics Tony Omlock and Terry Richards, plastics designer Andy Smallman. At 3:30 on November 29th, the 6 people left the Castellet Airport and flew to Marseille Major Airport. Hill visited, apologies for that, Hill visited the self-briefing room and obtained weather reports for the London area. An IFR, which stands for Instrument Flight Rules, flight plan was filled for a flight to Estria Airfield, which was his main airfield to visit at the time. Luton Airport was the main alternative. Piper Aztec plane, which was the main plane for the team and Hill to use for those races and test sessions, took off from Marseille at 5:45 p.m. Contact was made at London Air Traffic Control Centre at 8:45 and a weather report from Elstree was obtained, giving visibility of 2,000 metres and a cloud base of 300 foot above ground level. At 9:19 p.m. British time, the aircraft was past the London Heathrow approach and Hill was informed visibility at Elstree was 1,000 metres. 9:21, having descended to 4,000 feet, 1,200 metres, bottom south of Lambar Hewick range, Hill was informed that the visibility at Elstree was down to 800 metres. It was clear to descend to 460 metres below, which any the descent was at the pilot's discretion. The pilot was Graham Hill. At 9:28, London Approach Controller contacted the plane with the plate carrying N6645 right to pass the information. There was no reply. Shortly after, radar contact was lost. The Aztec, already with its landing gear in flaps extended, brushed the top of a large tree at an elevation of 460 feet, 140 metres, high above sea level within Arkley Golf Course, to 5.6 kilometres to the east and 130 foot above Elstree Airport, and then it descended further, colliding with more trees, falling to the right, striking the ground with its wing tip and finally crashing into a corpse. An intensified event of the impact which destroyed most of the aircraft. All 6 occupants were killed instantly. Elstree runway was equipped with red lights and low intensity indicators, but lacked any radio aid, and there was no public instrument approach, making it unusable for low visibility operation. Witnesses at the time that saw the crash said that there was thick fog with visibilities of 50 to 100 metres. 3 hours earlier, a pilot of another light aircraft attempted 3 approaching Elstree, assisted with radar headings and distances. Sounded low as 300 foot, but was not visible. He eventually the pilot diverted to another airport. The aircraft, which Hill bought, was back in 1968. It was sold by Malwich Aviation to Grand Prix Bahamas Limited, and it was requested to remove the aircraft from the FAA registration, but it did not take place until August 1974. It was legally stateless, the plane, from April 1972. It was continued without certification of airworthiness, and at the time of the accident it flown 1,100 miles. When the investigate, and as a result of this, the Embassy Hill team was forced to close because it only consisted of the deputy team manager and 2 mechanics. It was impossible to continue. The team closed down. The equipment was sold to Walter Wolf for his basically run-down Formula 1 team. Because of the own insurance on the plane, Hill's widow, Betty, was sued for damages by Andy Smallman's family. Because Hill was uninsured, settling a large portion of his money. And that would mean basically having to rebuild the family legacy, as that meant Graham's son Damon later became a race driver before winning the title in 1996. But the Embassy Hill team would be remembered for bringing up all the things into confusion. This is a Classic Motorsport podcast. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. For those that are watching on YouTube and Dailymotion, thumbs up, like, share and subscribe. For those that are listening on Spotify and so on, share and download. You might like the podcasts. I'm Gareth Thomas, and this is Classic Motorsport Podcasts. the story of the Embassy Hill Formula 1 team. I'm Gareth Thomas. Goodbye.